Hi everyone, my name is Faiza Falali, and today I'm here with Professor Marika Landau-Wells from UC Berkeley, and we're here to talk about threat perception. Please briefly introduce yourself, summarize your seminar, and highlight your main arguments.
My name is Marika Landau-Wells. I am a assistant professor of political science at UC Berkeley. I study security, sort of writ large, and in particular threat perception, so how people respond to danger in the world around them. And the main argument that I'm making today is that our perceptions of danger and that feeling that we get, that feeling of insecurity, is a really important thing to learn how to study and to learn how to study it better. And so I'm hoping to kind of help people from national security professionals all the way down to the decisions we make every day.
Perfect. In your chapter, you argue that policymakers often act on imagined security rather than genuine insecurity. You highlight that imagined security is rooted in subjective perception, while genuine security is an objective condition. How do you think this gap should shape the way scholars and practitioners define national security moving forward?
I think that the two distinct concepts, so the feeling of insecurity and then the sort of objective state or the measurement that we can take of whether or not someone is or isn't secure, should help us kind of bifurcate the field and split it into two. Sometimes we want to study genuine security. We want to study how safe someone, something, some country is in some measure. So how many tanks do the neighbors have? Where are the nuclear weapons? And we can ask that and ask questions of what I would call genuine security. But if we want to understand decision making, so who are the nuclear weapons pointed at? Are the tanks going to be used? Those are questions of imagined security. And imagined security requires figuring out what's going on in people's heads. And so I think that those are two different problems, and we might be interested in one or the other, but what we shouldn't do is conflate the two and say that they are the same thing.
Your research draws on neuroscience to explain how humans perceive and respond to threats. How do you reconcile the evolutionary hardwiring of our threat perceptions with the fact that political environments and threats are constantly changing?
So the way that I think about my work is studying the architecture of the human mind and brain for processing threats. You can think about architecture, you can think about hardware, you can use any sort of metaphor that you want to get at that sort of fundamental construction. But what's different for each one of us and what changes all the time is what you might think of as the software. So just like we're all prepared when we're born to learn a language, but we don't have language yet, we're prepared, we have the architecture for doing it, but we all learn different languages, and we can learn many languages. And our brain will become specialized in ways of recognizing the language that's dominant. Same thing for threats. We come prepared to learn, but we learn from our environment and as we go and as we move through the world. And so the fact that our environments are dynamic, that the situations we find ourselves in change all the time, creates this interplay between what our brains can handle and how our minds process danger and the architecture we have for dealing with that, and the fact that the world sometimes changes even faster than we can keep up with. So.
Your background bridges government, global politics, political science, and neuroscience. For students interested in integrating cognitive science, psychology, or other interdisciplinary methods into their work on international security, what guidance would you give on how to start building those connections both meaningfully and balancing their approaches?
That's a big question. It's obviously something that I've had to reckon with, and I would love to make the road easier for others, but there are certain sort of hard facts that you have to come to grips with, and one is time. So if you want to become an expert in two things, it roughly takes twice as much time. There's no shortcut for that. There's nothing you can do other than do the work. The trick and the thing that I would like to make more accessible to more people is the access. So how hard is it to get the training, to get the exposure, to get all of that time? The great news is as undergrads, you can double major, you can take classes in things that aren't your main field, and that's absolutely what I suggest. So I work with undergrads at UC Berkeley who come in as my research assistants, and some of them are poli-sci, cognitive science, double majors. And they're taking classes in neuroscience and they're taking classes in politics, and then they're working with me to understand how to put those two things together. And I think undergrads have that unique opportunity. Once you go off to grad school, people are going to start trying to make you specialize, and it gets harder and harder to be broad. But if you're an undergrad, there's that little course out there that you think, oh, that might be interesting. Try it. And be as broad as you can, because it's really the time to do it. It definitely gets harder later, even if it's later that you realize, oh, now I know what to do with all of this knowledge. Go for some breadth, for sure.
How might your framework help us better understand the persistence of nuclear deterrence strategies despite their obvious dangers?
So nuclear deterrence is this idea, if I'm reading you right, that basically if I have nuclear weapons and you have nuclear weapons, I'm not going to use my weapons because I know you're going to use yours. If I move first, you'll move second. And one of the it's one of the great discomforts, I think, that kept people in some way safe, or they thought kept them safe during the Cold War, was this understanding of what another person would do if I move first. And this sort of ability to intuit, hey, what someone else is thinking, and oh, they would hurt me if I do this, is deeply intertwined with our sense of security. We're always trying to figure out what other people will do and whether or not we're essentially safe or mutually unsafe around them. I think that for me, nuclear deterrence, I think we're happy that states haven't exchanged nuclear weapons. We're not 100% sure why. This is certainly one theory, this theory of basically automated revenge. There have been a lot of attempts to escape this trap, to feel safer, because ultimately nuclear weapons make us feel unsafe, the existence, a lot of people feel unsafe. And it was one of the big motivators behind President Reagan's quest for missile defense, was this notion that it was deeply unsatisfying to be unsafe and to have that sort of mutually assured destruction hanging over everyone. And he thought, wouldn't it be great if we could have perfect protection? And he ran up against this reality of physics, which said, actually, this thing that you want, this protective shield, whether it's in space or somewhere else, you can't have it. And I think it illustrates one of the hardest problems with the difference between feeling secure and being secure. We're probably more secure in many ways without that shield. But that shield would make us feel safe. And so we want the shield. Or some people do, and they want it very badly. And they want it badly enough to say, physics, let's see if we can move the ball on physics instead of giving up our dream for this type of protection. And that gap between what we can have and what we want and what that need for security makes us want, I think is a really powerful motivator and worth understanding. But in the end, sometimes you do run up against physics and you can't have everything you want. And we also have to find a way to live with that. And deterrence was one of the ways we kind of psyched ourselves into living with it, was to say, okay, we're in this dilemma, but everybody's in the dilemma and we'll be okay, as long as we all play by the rules of the dilemma. So it's an uncomfortable place, and studying security is about studying the uncomfortable state of what it means to be human and be vulnerable and have big weapons out there. But I think it's important to grapple with it and to make sure that we really understand how people make decisions even when they feel unsafe, how they chase the things that they want but can't have. And I think we can learn a lot about our world that way.
I hope so. Do you think policymakers themselves are aware of the role of cognitive biases and neural processes in shaping their decisions, or is that something that kind of happens mostly under the surface?
So I think that there are, if you pick out a policymaker, they might have read a book, Thinking Fast and Slow, maybe, by Daniel Kahneman. There's some, I think, general awareness that biases and heuristics and things play a role in decision making. Whether or not someone attributes their specific decision to one of those biases and processes and is self-aware enough to kind of step back and take that view, I'm not sure. A lot of these decisions happen quickly or happen in social contexts and meetings and things where you don't have time to do that kind of self-examination. But we also have a lot more control over ourselves than sometimes we are willing to admit. And so sometimes I think these biases and heuristics are used as excuses for making snap judgments, for relying on prior beliefs without using, updating with current data and that sort of thing. And in that sense, I'd say people are aware of them enough maybe to use them as an excuse. But then you have to take that one step further and say, well, we all can also revisit our decisions, our processes, think a little slower, be more deliberative, regulate ourselves in our responses. We can do that. The question is whether we choose to do that in a given moment. And so awareness, I'd say, yes, I think that people are somewhat aware, but willing to deal with, maybe not.
Looking ahead, what emerging security issues such as climate change, cybersecurity, AI, any of those, do you think most illustrate the tension between imagined and genuine security? And how should scholars and policymakers attempt to approach them?
So I think of the three you mentioned, I'll pick climate and AI as two where I think that the distinction is important. I will say that by AI, I don't necessarily sign up to the these are actually intelligent models, but we are handing over some decision-making authority to algorithms, and you could say that that's a choice. I think that the genuine security risk posed by doing that is something that people are trying to bring to the surface. People who are in the AI risk community, for example, are trying to talk about the actual concerns, whether it's the environmental cost of running large servers or whatever, that there are security problems inherent in this. But what people imagine is a problem is maybe a little bit more informed by movies and TV. And so they have possibly the wrong problems that they imagine and worry about. Whereas, the actual problems that are being created with these tools is something that maybe people aren't as willing to face up to. And I think there's something similar for climate. Of course, there are people who are quite aware that climate change poses an existential risk. You only have to look at the small Pacific Island nations to see, I think it's written in the Constitution of Tuvalu that they have to, that climate change is an existential risk to their country. They know it. But there are a lot of folks who prefer not to deal with that problem and would prefer to imagine that it is something that can be made to go away with money or enough taxes or enough carbon credits. And so they might be solving the wrong problem there. In that case, they're feeling insecure, but maybe in the wrong way. So I think the concept can be helpful on a couple of these emerging fronts. Yeah.